Stu, we are back for the GW Book Club, but we're doing something a little bit different this time. We have decided, I don't know whether this is going to turn out to be a good idea or not, but given that we've just finished reading 17 GW books, I have them all right here, precariously placed on my
Yeah,
desk. All
you do.
17. We've just completed them. The original GW book. So this was our plan when we first started the GW book club. We were going to sit down every single month and talk about each of the original books that was published in between 89 and 1991 by the GW Books imprint, and we'd go through them chronologically. So we've just
Yeah.
finished it. We've completed Beasts in Velvet. That's the 17th book. We've now done them all. Sure, there's loads of other books. There's the Box Tree books. There's Black Library books. There's loads of other fiction. But this was our original intention. We'll be reading loads of other stuff in because the GW Book Club is not over. We're going to continue. We're going to do lots of
Not at all. Yeah.
non-fiction and fiction and all sorts of good stuff. But it felt like the right time to kind of sit down and do something a little bit different. And we're going to do a tier list of ours of the 17 books.
We are. We're going to try.
Yeah, we're gonna try. We're gonna
We're
try.
going to try.
There was talk at one point about doing all of the short stories individually and like just doing a tier list of literally everything. But that was reasonable. You were reasonable in shooting me down on that plan because
I think it would have
we
been
would have been
painful,
here.
not just for us, but for anyone attempting to view it would have been. But a tier
Yes,
list is a good idea. I mean, you had the idea right at the end of our last show,
sure.
didn't you? And then
Yep.
for continuity, we've decided to wear exactly the same clothes.
Yeah. Well,
It's almost like it's almost,
don't give away the movie magic, Stu. This is the GW Book Club. This is a professional outfit.
hey,
This.
I had to wash and iron this today just to make sure it was ready.
So we're gonna jump. We're gonna jump in, right? We've got our sort of tier list. We're going from S down to F. So S
Hmm.
being the best tier, the superior tier. A, B, C, D, E, and F. No, there's no. I've missed off E. So there's no E tier. So we go D to F. So it's fine.
Straight to
Yeah, exactly. But that's our tiers, right? So we're going to be trying to filter through these 17 books and see which ones we think are right at the top, are the best books that we have read from this series. It might be that there's some tiers that don't have anything in. We might think all of
yeah,
them are superior. We might love every single one so much. They're all top tier books for us. I suspect that's not going to be the case, but we're going to go through. We're going to do our best to filter them out. So we've got to start then with Ignorant Armies, right?
mm,
This one was the first anthology of Warhammer stories. This has got your first Gotrek and Felix story. It's got the Ignorant Armies by Jack Yeovil, which is Kim Newman. What else have we got in here? We got The Other by Nicola Griffith, which was a really
yeah,
good book, good story that we read. Gardner in Paravon, if you remember that
yeah.
one.
I
That
do.
was, of
Yeah, I
course,
do.
quite a fascinating tale. That was our first Brian Craig story, I think.
Oh,
So,
what it could have told us about the future.
oh well, yeah. I mean, and I would argue, I would say actually that might be one of the best Brian Craig short stories
Yeah,
not my favorite, and we'll get to my favorite of all the Brian Craig stories, but it was a good one, I think that because that was
yeah.
like the sort of the chaos cultist in Paravon whose garden is full of like strange kind of phallic flowers and stuff, right?
It was. Yeah, I'm not sure I enjoyed it as much as you
No,
did.
I thought it was odd. It was odd in the right kind of like it was just a chaotic Warhammery kind of way that I think kind of
Yeah,
worked.
yeah. It was interesting. I'll
Yeah,
give it that.
I mean, similarly interesting in a different way was the Starboat by Stephen Baxter.
Yes. I mean, it's a real eclectic mix. It was a wild ride, that book,
It really was.
and really enjoyable. Even the stories that were probably weren't the best.
Hmm.
It was a brilliant preview to the journey we were going to go on for the remaining 16 stories, and I think its highs were as as almost as high as the best parts for the whole series. And I think some
Yeah.
of the lows gave us a bit of an indication of where we might drop down to below the E that doesn't exist and all the way straight to the F. Um, but it was great fun, and it was
Yeah.
a great way of kicking. I'm glad that they did it that way. I think it was a great way of kicking off the
I think it
series.
is a good collection to start the GW books sort of imprint with. And you're right, it does set out the stall of Warhammer Fantasy for good and ill. Because you
Hmm.
have the first ever short story in the Warhammer world, like a published book format short story, is Gotrek and Felix.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah,
That's just like that's so narratively satisfying, like in the real world, for that long running series to have been the very beginning. And for
yeah.
that story, it's not like William King didn't have to find his feet. That story is brilliant. It is just a great adventure with those characters. And it's also, I've talked time and time again about how Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay versus Warhammer Fantasy Battle and the vibes and the feel of those different, slightly different takes on the Warhammer world. This one, Geheimnisnacht is full Woofrup, is
Hmm.
inspired by, and it plays very much like it. It's a great read, I think.
Yeah, I really like it. It's like I said, I think it's tells you everything you can
Yeah.
expect in each direction for what's to come.
Yeah, and you do actually end with another William King story, The Laughter of the Dark Gods, which was also
Hmm.
great, I think,
Hmm.
which introduced a couple of characters who we would see again as well, so the Von Deals.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
there's a couple of reasonably generic fantasy stories in here. Apprentice Luck by Sean Flynn, which was
Hmm.
the sort of the apprentice who worked in a shop for a wizard who
Yes,
ended
I
up
remember
getting
now. Yes,
recruited by
yeah,
like a vermin man, kind of like a bug man, to go on a
yeah.
quest. And it is quite generic. It was fine though. Similarly, The Reavers and the Dead by Charles Davidson, which was
Hmm.
kind of was literally just a young boy who's been experimenting with necromancy.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Gets
yeah. That
gets
was yeah, yeah.
Oh, the cool thing in that one was that there was then the sort of Norse marauder raid, and his village
Yes.
is destroyed. And it turns out the reason the raiders came in the first place was because he was experimenting with necromancy. But then he
Yeah.
accidentally gets himself taken over and possessed by a more powerful necromancer. So there's quite
Um,
a sort of neat moral to the story that kind of
there
works.
is. And I find myself now thinking of being reminded of those stories and thinking the ones that weren't as great, thinking, oh, okay, well, that's a shame. But now in hindsight, thinking that as concepts, they're better than some to come later
We will see
on.
lower lows. Yes, I agree. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Because even the
Oh, sweet
Starboat,
child of summer, thinking that this was a.
even those two, the more generic stories, they're fine. The Starboat, which is quite eccentric and has a lot of interesting stuff in, there's things in that story that I did not like, but there
Mm,
were also things in that story that I did like. We have a sort of slan dude who is actually a
yeah,
human who's been like genetically modified to be a slan or whatever. That's ridiculous. But then you have like a werewolf Norseman who goes on a quest to Kislev and steals like an artifact like Indiana Jones, and that was pretty cool. So
yeah,
there's like cool things in there. I mean,
yeah,
I think Ignorant Armies. I think I genuinely think it is a really good start to the GW books
yeah.
series. It's
Agreed.
of its
Agreed.
time, but some of the stories are timeless as well, I
Yeah,
would
yeah.
say.
I think it's overall it's a pretty excellent book. Some of the
Yeah.
stories in it are absolutely brilliant, and the ones that aren't are fun to a certain extent. They're either short enough that they're inconsequential and it's fine,
Hmm.
or they're wacky enough that we've laughed about it and it's
Yeah.
still been fun, and you've not had to invest 6 to 8 hours of reading 280 pages only to think, oh, that was tough. It didn't matter because they were short and they're fun and we had a laugh with it. So I think as a book, it'll, for me, it will score quite well because
Yeah.
there's enough really good stuff, and the stuff that wasn't great was just good fun.
Does it get up to S tier for you? Is it right at the top?
I don't think so. No, I think
No.
there's too many that are just that aren't good enough, and that would be a bit of a stretch. It could be A,
Yeah.
somewhere between A and B. I'd be happy with either. I think the good ones for me are good, especially with the Gotrek and Felix in there. The good
Yeah.
Felix in there. The good ones are good enough that I'd be happy with it being an A or B. To be honest with you.
I think I'm willing to go with an A as well because I think you're right. The good stories that are in this collection, they
Mm.
are really good.
Yeah.
I think Geheimnisnacht, I think the Nicola Griffith
Hmm.
story, I think is really good. Just a very different type of story in the Warhammer world. I think Ignorant Armies itself, the Jack Yeovil story, is really good. And then Laughter of the Dark Gods.
Yeah.
Like those stories are really good. Everything else in there, is a degree of acceptable to good. So
Yes. Yeah.
I'd say A. Yeah, I'd say because it could even if it was just those four stories, like as half the size, I think I would still be like, yeah, that's A. That's great.
Yeah. 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 Agreed. Agreed.
All right. So we've got our benchmark and then we've started. We've got an A tier book. The next one is the first full novel. So this one is Drachenfels by
Hmm.
Jack Yeovil. So Kim Newman, writing as Jack Yeovil, first novel, first full story set in the Warhammer Fantasy universe. Obviously, features the Great Enchanter Drachenfels, the Vampire Genevieve, the Elector Count, Oswald, Detlef Sack, the playwright. How are you feeling about this one?
I think we know where this is going, don't we? It's, I think well, if anyone who's watched this, they're watching this, having watched the series, they all know where it's going as well. Absolutely fantastic book. That's either, I think, probably, I'm going to speak for you now as well, but either of number one or number two in the
Mhm.
series overall. Um, and yeah, it's just absolutely a wonderful book. Enjoyed it so much. It was a real surprise how much I enjoyed it. And really starkly good compared to some of the less able short stories, shall we say, from Ignorant Armies. It was just like, wow, this is great, and we were super excited to go into to number three after that because it was
Yeah.
just so good. So for me, confident S tier right from the top, really good.
More than happy to go with that. I think, yeah, you're totally right. It is just it was everything. Even though I didn't know, like if you'd before I read any of these books, if you told me to like tell you what the perfect Warhammer fantasy novel would have been,
Yeah,
would I have said this? I doubt it. But then having read it, it did everything I wanted it to do and more. It was funny, it was scary, it was just dripping with the character of the old world. So many great moments, so many cool characters. It set the tone for the GW books kind of experiment, basically saying, yeah, you know what, it can be done. This fiction can work, and we can get great stories from it. I, you know, probably the worst thing about the Drachenfels book is the fact that there isn't more like Drachenfels and Drachenfels characters just in Warhammer since. We have
yeah.
some more within these books, but it's a shame that the sort of legacy wasn't quite as fulfilled as it could have been because there's so much good stuff here. It's like just fantastic.
Yeah, yeah, really, really fantastic. Yeah, I'm gonna go back and read it again soon. I think.
Yeah.
Well, I might listen to it now. I've got
Well, yeah, I
the
read it
audio, and I
twice in
might go
quick
back and enjoy it
succession
while I'm working.
and then listened to it and enjoyed it every single time. Got stuff from it every time because it's brilliant. And I think it will be a book I return to again and again. Is my suspicion.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think you will return to the next book again and again?
No.
This is Zaragoz, the first
Yeah.
book in the Orfeo trilogy by Brian Craig. So this went in a slightly different direction. This was a tale of an Estalian city state called
Hmm.
Zaragoz. We get a framing device which features the minstrel Orfeo in Araby, who's captured and forced to tell a tale. Sort of, is it's the 1001 Nights kind of framing device, and he's telling a tale about a corner of the old world that has never been seen before. or pretty much since, really. I mean, the story itself, I thought was perfectly good.
Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, he's got plus one of the big plus points for it is that it's the one part of the Orfeo trilogy where Orfeo's actually in it
Yeah,
as a character properly, rather than just the plot device, because it's the weirdest trilogy in that regard ever. I can't remember what I graded it back then as the thumbs up or thumbs down. I definitely knew if I gave it a thumbs up, it would have been a polite, tentative thumbs up because I didn't enjoy it as much as the previous two books at all, not even close. And it definitely one of the big things was, and it's the same with a lot of Brian Craig's stuff. Is it really even Warhammer?
mm.
And I think that detracts from the overall writing because most of it's fine. I'm not a huge fan of the style, but most of it's okay as a story.
Yeah.
But it not being Warhammer, not even remotely, and it feels like that wasn't even that much of an attempt to make it Warhammer at times, really spoilt it for me. There are good bits. Yeah, it's not something I look back on fondly and or would have any desire to read again, if I'm honest with you. I'm happy to own it as part of my collection, and
Yeah.
I will return to it as in to move it at some point, I'm sure.
Right.
I'm sure I'll dust that shelf at some point, and so I will return to it, but just in that sense.
Mm.
It's a shame, but yeah, this was the first kind of, oh, there's going to be some of these in this series as well. But it was a nice experience.
Yeah, I'm more favorable towards it than you are. I
Mm.
on its own merits, I think it's a perfectly good fantasy story. I can reconcile its existence with my personal version of the Warhammer world. Like this could absolutely be taking place in Estalia for me. I think it's flawed, but there's enough in it. Like Orfeo in this book is like an interesting enough character. It is an interesting enough sort of framing device. There's even like hints of things that might pay off later. You know, you kind of get this sense that there's more to the Orfeo story. You know, who is he? What's his history? That kind of stuff. And then within the actual the city state of Zaragoza as well, the chaos corruption that all plays out in a perfectly fun way. It kind of, it sort of reflecting back on it, it almost has maybe it's kind of a fighting fantasy vibe, that kind of fantasy
Yeah,
world a little bit.
yeah, definitely, definitely.
And that's fine, I think, for me. I I agree it's not certainly not that Warhammery, but it at this point the Orfeo trilogy isn't it, I think it was fine. I think it was fine. I think I would put it like right in the middle of the pack. So for me, it's a B or a C, and I'd probably veer to B. I would say, but
Okay.
I could be persuaded to C if you felt strongly.
I mean, we're not going to lose any sleep over it being in B, but it would be a C for me, I think.
C. Okay, well let's go for C then. I think that's fair. So we've got that. We've got next up is the second anthology of stories. So it's Wolf Riders
Mm,
this time.
yes.
So this was another interesting one. So we get our second, we get another Godric and Felix story in here, Wolf Riders, the
Hmm.
eponymous title. Um, we also get the Talion Rat, which features Sam Warble's first appearance
He does. That was
in
good fun.
Marienburg. There's another Brian Craig, The Phantom of Remy,
Yeah.
which was a sort of a slightly strange kind of story about someone laying a sort of ghostly trap for a magistrate who like did cruel and unusual punishments. So that was
Yes.
kind of a strange one. Cry of the Beast, which, if
Hmm.
memory serves, was one of the worst short stories in the entire run. Um,
Ralph T. Castle.
Ralph T. Which
I'd have
I
rather
don't
had
think you wrote
Roy
it.
Castle playing his trumpet. That's a reference that very, very few people are going to get.
But that story, because that one is where we get the the boy who was abandoned by his father because his father went off to chase down chaos.
Yeah.
And then it
Yeah.
turns out that the father has made his way back and lives on the coast as like a
Yes.
mutant that
Yeah.
that torments the boy because the boy lives in a shack with a halfling, and there's like
Yeah.
chaos
Yeah.
all the
It's
time.
just weird as it sounds when you. But yeah, it wasn't great, was it?
It was
Oh,
rough. It was rough because, like, and I think what we'll see time and time again with, say, Brian Craig, for instance. I quite respect a lot of Brian Craig's ideas, and I think he can come up with amazing moments or twists or like
mhm.
reveals and stuff. But there are conceptual elements to the stories he writes that are really fun and that I find rewarding, even if the like sum of the parts is kind of not where it needs to be.
Yeah.
Whereas this story was just conceptually, it's just devoid of interesting ideas and is executed in a terrible way as well. I don't want to be cruel to Ralph, but it didn't work for me. It was a really
No.
rough read. No real redeeming qualities to it. But that's immediately followed by another high point. So this was No
Yeah.
Gold in the Grey Mountains, which was the Jack Yeovil story. It ties in loosely to Drachenfels. It's kind of a
Yeah.
band of brigands who accidentally lock themselves in a castle, a haunted castle no less, with an ageless evil vampire monster.
And it's great. Really good.
Really good. Yeah, really, really good. Um, then we got The Hammer of the Stars by Pete Garrett, which I think was a slightly unusual take. Much like Brian Craig's, it paints an odd picture of a Warhammer city where you've kind of got
Hmm.
students and like traveling.
Yeah.
There's like a traveling carnival come to stay in the city, and they drug everybody, and then they try and steal a hammer from
Oh
beneath the
yes. Yeah.
city.
Yeah. I wasn't a
It
fan.
wasn't great. It just did. I mean, nothing about it felt like it was in the Warhammer world. It also felt like it was screaming out for a sequel that just never happened. So I don't know if that
Yeah.
was the intention, but it almost ends on a cliffhanger. Um, not great. Then the divisive tale, Pulg's Grand Carnival
Mm.
by Simon Ownsley. Now, some people in the comments and in the Patreon chat quite enjoyed the sort of oddities of this tale. I don't think
Yeah.
either of us really liked it, though, did we?
No, I thought it was awful. It was a terrible story at the time.
Yeah.
And looking back on it now, I don't think I'd changed my mind if I reread it. But anyway,
No, I don't think I would get on board with it. This was like a really odd story of a kind of P.T. Barnum kind of circus guy who has like they have like a wyvern,
hmm.
and he's
Think
just
so. Yeah.
he he's sort of adopted someone, but he's actually a bad guy himself, and then it's all the politics of like can the like local legislature like force
It's
him to
odd.
close his circus and stuff.
Yeah, it was odd. It was very odd.
Yeah. It just didn't come together. And then another Brian Craig story, which is The Way of the Witchfinder, which was
Hmm.
about the gods of law. So there were some
Yeah.
interesting ideas. If again memory serves, I think I again was probably more favorable towards that one than you. I think I
Yeah.
liked the idea. This is a version of the gods of law, and this is a version of the Warhammer world where the gods of law could have gone on to be as influential and important as the Chaos gods.
Yeah. Yeah.
And had they done that, this might be like a really interesting early like lore point in their story. Because they didn't, it's kind of just a really odd moot story that has no real bearing on the Warhammer world.
Yeah.
The only cool thing about it that kind of makes a lot of sense is like the city it's like on the sea almost. It's like on the beaches.
Yeah.
It can be it's like Mont Saint Michel, I think, right? Where it's almost
Yes. Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
just
Yeah.
on the sand itself and surrounded by sea, and that's quite cool. That's a cool sort of setting.
The setting was cool. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it was two things. The one, obviously, Craig's style of writing at times can be a little bit unusual, and then the other part, yeah, like you said, probably through no fault of his own, he's dipped into Wooferup and managed to focus in on something that was essentially dropped from the game, and the combination of that is it's not that memorable.
Yeah, yeah, I'd agree. So I guess the question then is: do Wolf Riders and No Gold in the Grey Mountains, and maybe the Italian Rat, like, are those three stories
Enough to
enough?
save it.
Yeah,
Because I think the others are significantly worse than the worst ones earlier. I think they're really quite poor.
yeah, some of them are.
Um, as in, aren't they kind of notably never published again, and some of those authors never seen again, kind of thing as
Not in,
well.
yeah, not in the
Yeah,
GW sphere.
yeah, within the context of GW, and I think that said an awful lot about it as well. Because it's a shame, because Wolf Riders and No Gold on the Grey Mountains are S or A tier stories.
Yeah,
Chilean Rat is probably A or B tier, probably B tier story, really. It was
sure,
fun, but it wasn't a
probably.
great story. And the others are F.
Yeah.
Maybe you'd probably say maybe the Way the Witchfinder would have been a D, maybe even a C. You might have put it out, but
No,
the
I
other
wouldn't go as high as C.
Polg and the Hammer of the Stars are D or F stories, and I think
Yeah,
that probably drops the whole book down to, for me, a C, maybe.
I think you're probably right. I think the balance of it's just so wrong that
Mm.
even those two great stories, they're the only thing that keeps the book as a whole from being F, probably. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, you could have
quite a
had
slog.
out of the two anthologies now, you could have stripped out a few and had an S tier
Oh man,
anthology, couldn't you?
you really could have. Yeah, that would have been something. That would have been something for sure. But yeah, I think you're right. I think C is probably the best it can go,
Mhm.
um, for me as well. Okay, we have got the start of another epic trilogy next. This is
Mhm.
Conrad.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
it's tricky, tricky,
David Ferring.
tricky.
Yeah, this I feel starts off the trilogy in quite a fun way. So Conrad's story is essentially, there's kind of a question mark over is he going to be the next Sigmar, or is he
Hmm.
going to be the next, I guess, Archeon before Archeon existed? So he is like a divine, fated hero. Starts off as a nobody, but it begins an epic fantasy quest, where his village is destroyed, but his love is lost to him. He is recruited by a guy called Wolf, who
Hmm.
is kind of wolf-like. This guy, a bounty hunter. He seems to know a little bit more about certain secrets that might be out there. And then together they go off into run a mine in Kislev, and
Mm.
from there, randomly, go in search of gold, which kind of brings about some dramatic fights with goblins and these kind of visions of Sigmar and all this sort of stuff. As the first chapter in a trilogy of like an epic, a teenage boy's adventure to become a great hero in the Empire, I personally thought it was a good start.
Yeah, I think I really enjoyed the start of the start. I think the first half of the book was
Yeah,
really good. I just really didn't enjoy that last. I think it was the last third probably,
sure.
and that significantly drops it down. And I'm trying not to be swayed by what comes in the next of that series as well. But the start, there's just some really great scenes in the first third or first half as
Yeah,
well. Enough that it would never be S tier, but potentially A tier
right.
scenes and parts of the book. For me though, it's B or C comfortably. If I'm going to be kind, I'd say B because of the really good bits are pretty good. Um,
Yeah, because it's like when he's outside his village, he ends up sort of almost captured by a load of beastmen who are milling and
mm,
sort of starting to congregate so that they can attack the village. So he has to pretend to be a beastman at one point. So he sort of wears the skin of one that he's killed. All of that sequence was
it's great.
excellent. Really good
Yeah.
stuff in there because it's this right level of like threat, and the stakes are super high. There's also loads of really interesting mysteries created through the course of this first book, where like Conrad himself is an orphan. He's been adopted and sort of is in, he's in doing a terrible job working for like a landlord, like a tavern owner, but he is not the tavern owner's son. So how did he come to be there? So you kind of get in this, Luke Skywalker kind of setup. The girl that he falls in love with, she's the daughter of a noble, and she gets him like a really interesting bow and some arrows that have got certain marks etched onto them, like certain liveries. Okay, well, what do they mean? What's the story behind those? Why did the attack happen in this village? What's Wolf's involvement? There's a big brass Chaos Knight who happens to sort of herald the arrival of the Beastman. What's that story about? So you kind of get loads of really cool stuff set up. That's all put to one side for Conrad to have a very quick montage to become like a super warrior whilst he's manning the mines in Kislev. And then you go on this sort of weird treasure hunt at the very end, which it's totally out of left field, isn't great, but does have some really cool sequences. There's like a really cool fight against goblins that is really interesting, and a totally arbitrary ending where the brass knight just reappears. So it is a bit of a mixed bag. I think I would be willing to go with a B or a C tier, because there's enough stuff, like there's enough promise for this trilogy from this book that I'd probably go B. Actually, I think I came out of the book saying, what, I'm excited to read more. I want to see where the story goes.
Yes,
I cannot wait for all of the amazing like resolutions to these exciting threads that have been dangled in front of
it's
me.
a good thing waiting is exciting, isn't it?
Right, let's put that in B tier. So at the moment, we've got Drachenfels in S, we've got Ignorant Armies in A, Conrad in B, and Zaragos and Wolf Riders in C. Next up, it's another Orfeo title. It is Plague Demon by Brian Craig. Orfeo, still trapped, still telling stories in Araby. This one, though, doesn't feature Orfeo in the actual story itself. He's just like telling a story of a random dude who is like really objectionable and boring, and has no inner monologue whatsoever. But so it's a story of an invasion of just some random humans into a random border prince's province. Empire it's described as, but that doesn't make sense. Like all of that is a bit weak, but the actual plague demon that's running around doing nefarious stuff is cool.
Yeah.
And I genuinely think that this has got one of the coolest moments in GW books. Just literally like one really super cool idea that I really enjoyed a lot. Even though a lot of the other elements aren't as good.
And that rescues it from an F tier to a or rescues it from a D to a C maybe. Because you're right, there are a couple of cool elements in it, but the premise was poor. The fact that Orfeo wasn't in his own trilogy anymore is poor. The fact that it's in the Empire, in the old world, sorry, for the first time, we think great. Craig's actually somewhere that's been mapped out a little bit more, but then completely fails to treat it like any known parts of that geography. And this, for me, there's so many things like that are just poor that it spoils it. But you're right, there are some cool things to do with the plague demon itself and the way it's handled.
Yeah.
But for me, that's not enough to sort of do a lot of saving, but it's enough to kind of drag it up the table slightly.
Yeah, because I don't think this is F. I think this is higher for me. The particularly cool thing I really like is that the plague demon basically infects a load of gold coins that end up going out into the city, whilst the city is sort of racked by this like evacuation because there's an invasion happening. So the coins are making their way through the city. Everyone's in close quarters, and that just spreads this infection around the city. And then, in order to try and stop the infection, they have to a collection of wizards and the main characters. They manage to take some of this magical water that's been really effective up to this point. It's been part of the story since the very beginning. This black tarn water, and then they create storm clouds and get the magical water up into the clouds, and then rain the cure across the city to sort of counteract the plague demon's infection. And I just really, really liked that. I think that was just a really clever, unexpected use of magic in a way that's kind of like logical and interesting.
Yeah.
And it also happens during the sort of the sort of peak of the invasion into the cities. There's some cool action scenes in there as well. So yeah, I think that was a great moment. And there were a couple of other moments in the book that I did enjoy as well. So I would have said that this was C or D. And I'd be willing to fight for a C, I think, on this. I don't think it was.
I would accept a C. No, I'd be happy to accept a C on it because the good parts are good enough.
Yeah, like I mean, did you hate read? Like, was it a slog to read through? Do you think?
No, I wouldn't say so. And a lot of the ones I don't like weren't a slog.
Sure.
And it might be partly because of the whole process of us doing this was fun in itself.
Yeah.
It's not something I was just picking up a book to choose to read on a Sunday afternoon. It's fun talking about them. It's fun doing this series. So that just changed the whole sort of context of what we were doing. So it definitely wasn't a slog, but there were definitely disappointments in it because very few minor adjustments could have made it so much better, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it could have been better. Yeah, I'd say a C for now, and then maybe let's see where we stand once we've done some other titles because maybe it'll slip down potentially. But yeah, let's go for a soft C for now.
Soft C.
Well, that brings us though to our final anthology of Warhammer Fantasy Stories, which is Red Thirst. So yeah, this was another collection of shorts. Once again, we are blessed with some fun stories. We've got The Dark Beneath the World, the Godric and Felix story by William King. So the third and final Godric and Felix story in the original GW books. Red Thirst by Jack Yeovil, which kind of takes a slightly different angle, has the vampire Genevieve and a couple of other characters that we see again. The Spells Below by Neil Jones, which was the one where there was like an apprentice to a wizard and the wizard had been uncovered as being villainous, and the guild were surrounding his wizard's house. She manages to get back in, and then it slowly dawns on her that actually this evil wizard has been using mind control to sort of control her. It was kind of an interesting idea. It just didn't stick the landing, I don't think, that one in particular. The Light of Transfiguration. Now, I suspect we will differ on this one because this is a Brian Craig story, and this, I think, is my favourite Brian Craig story of them all.
Yeah. Yeah, he was okay actually in context of Brian Craig stories. But no, in the context of Brian Craig's fantasy stories, because it's a different story when we look at the dark future stuff. Because they can be
that's true. But yeah, this one was where a nun, a sort of sister of whether she was a sister of, I think Shalia, maybe Sigmar.
Yeah, no, I did like this one. I did like this one. I don't think, I think you liked it a lot more. But
I got a lot out of this story. Yeah, because this one had a sort of a Black Narcissus kind of. She's like this nun up in the mountains where they're rebuilding a monastery out of a destroyed like black fortress of chaos that's been completely decimated. But she ends up collecting up the pieces of a stained glass window, and then a chaos dwarf turns up and gives her the final missing pieces. And basically, the mirror, the stained glass window, is a portal to chaos. And once she completes it, and she's been sort of corrupted over the course of trying to find all the pieces, she's become obsessed with it and hears these whisperings. Once she completes it, a Zinchian demon comes through and vaporizes her, and that's like the end of the story. And it's like the idea that it's just like, okay, this sort of thing is happening all the time in the Warhammer world. Just some random person becomes obsessed with some random thing that is just a sliver of knowledge that they shouldn't have, and it leads them to chaotic damnation. I
Mhm.
think it works. I think it's brilliant. I genuinely really really enjoyed it. It was my I would put that one short story alongside some of the other really great short stories, I think.
Yeah, yeah, I can see why. I can see why. Yeah,
Yeah. We also got the song by Steve Baxter, which was
yeah,
obviously having written the Starboat. This was another one of his tales. Um, this one uh, actually picks up with Sam Warble, so
hmm
it's taken over for oh, I've forgotten already who wrote the first Sam Warble story now. Um, but it was not Steve Baxter for the first one. This kind of takes things in a slightly different direction for Sam Warble. Um,
yeah.
I don't think I enjoyed this as much as some people did. Did you get a lot out of this one?
I remember liking Sam Warble, but thinking that the rest of the story wasn't great. I may be misremembering, and someone will likely come back and say, "You said this when you recorded." But I seem to remember that the story being a little bit disappointing. Disappointed that he'd been kind of used in the way he was. Um, yeah, I don't think it was great. I'm looking at my notes now on
Yeah.
it, and my notes weren't made to be read. God knows how many months afterwards they were meant to jog my memory out at the time. So they're bullet
This
points.
was Sam is sent to try and capture a song from a prisoner. From
Yes.
like there's an
So
elven underground kind of um, traffic in sort of human art, and the actual
yes.
the incredible singing voice of this lady means that she herself has become a captive of an evil elf, and Sam manages to capture her song in like a glass bottle,
Yeah.
which it's quite a cool idea. And then when the bottle shatters, the song is released. Like that's quite a neat bit of magic. I just think that the kind of noirish elements that we'd seen in it was Sandy Mitchell who'd written the Tilly and Rad.
Mhm. That's it. Yeah.
It worked better for that story than for this one. I think this one kind of was a bit more tongue in cheek in a way that didn't land well with me, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Which was a shame because I was really looking forward to another Sam Warble story. Um, but yeah, you can't win them all. Can't win them all. And then the final story is quite a long one. It's the Voyage South by Nicola Griffith.
Mm.
So the final Nicola Griffith stories in the GW books run. Um,
Yeah, I can remember having a lot of promise and
a lot of promise, I think. Not as
and then sort
successful
of
as the other.
fading away a little bit at the end, and then leaving more questions than answers. I
Yeah,
think.
I think that's fair. And I again, this is a story that was supposed to have a follow up. So there was going to be
Mm.
another short novella
Excuse me.
to complete the sort of the tale, um, which means that there's kind of again, like you say, lots of promise, lots of interesting characters. There's some exploration in maybe like the story kind of goes in a direction you don't quite expect because it starts with a woman whose sister has died from a drug overdose, essentially from a magical drug, and she's trying to
Yeah.
find out where that's come from, and that leads her to join up with a team of a crew of like a sort of smuggling trading operation, who then end up in Magritta, where there's like chaos infestation, and one of the ways in which chaos is sort of trying to destabilize the world is by sending out these sort of dangerous drugs. So there's kind of an interesting storyline there. There's a cool sea elf character called Send, who I mean
Hmm.
I quite liked. He's a sea elf wizard who is in a past life was a devotee of Slanesh. So in order to sort of fight the bad guys in Magritta, he summons a greater demon of Slanesh into a sea battle, and it turns up and starts throwing ships around and stuff. Like that
Yeah.
was quite cool. There's some cool ideas. There's some cool ideas in there. I just don't know that it quite all coalesced into a satisfying story for me.
Yeah, I agree.
So where do you put it then? So what, like
Ooh,
Red Thirst as a collection? Is it as good as Ignorant Armies?
no, I think it's a B, isn't it?
Yeah,
I think
somewhere
because
between.
even
So
the better ones weren't and as good as the good ones in the other compilations.
sure.
But maybe the worst ones weren't so standout kind of bad either. So yeah, I think it's almost a B all the way through. Or some stories are high Bs,
Mhm.
and because even the Jack Yeovil, Kim Newman, that's probably his weakest out of all of the stories he has. So even
Yes.
his, probably our best author throughout the series, had his worst day out in terms of a story. So I think for me, it's a solid B. And it's not a bad story. I enjoyed it, but
Yeah, I think that's dead on. I think yeah, a B for that. I agree. I think Red Thirst as a story. I'm looking forward to revisiting it. I'll be honest, because I at
yeah,
the time I think my expectations by this point were so high for Jack Yeovil stories, and we'd had a few bad non-Jack Yeovil stories, or at least weaker non-Jack Yeovil stories. I really wanted him to sort of swing in and save the day, and I struggled a little bit with some elements of Red Thirst. But I did still enjoy it enough. I thought there was still some cool stuff in there, and it's retroactively made even better because we'll see some of the characters again
yeah.
in a later story. So I'm looking forward to revisiting Red Thirst. Probably that's one of those stories I'm most looking forward to out of the whole GW books, I think, is to go back and
hmm
reread Red Thirst with a sort of hopefully a new
New
renewed.
perspective on it. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So yeah. So okay, so we got B, it sits alongside Conrad in the B tier.
hmm
But now for something completely different. So we get the first of the Dark Future books, which is a again an anthology of stories, Route 666. This one is absolutely chock full of stories. There's loads. There's loads of
Yeah,
stories in here. I mean, I'll quickly run through them. We got Route 666 by Jack Yeovil, Kid Zero and Snake Eyes by Brian Craig, Ghost Town by Neil Jones, Dual Control by Miles Burnham, Thicker Than Water by Brian Craig, Maverick Sun by Neil McIntosh, 4 Minute Warning by Miles Burnham, Only in the Twilight by Brian Craig, and Uptown Girl by William King.
yeah.
Um, One may note that there are three Brian Craig stories in this collection.
Yes.
And, you made that distinction before about Brian Craig's fantasy work versus his Dark Future work. How did you feel about the sort of, his work in this anthology?
He's more at home here, isn't he?
I
It's
think
a He's not trying to crowbar a story into a setting that's probably not something he's comfortable or familiar with,
yeah.
and this is much more something he's comfortable with, which is if we look back at some of the other anthologies, it's quite often, at least from my perspective, he's quite often one of the sort of the worst ones. I think overall the set of stories were pretty good as well. There are a couple that are a little bit, and we didn't enjoy that much. But I thought Brian Craig's stories were okay in it. A couple of them were very good. Um, and as a collection, I seem to remember really enjoying it. And there was a couple of slightly, slightly dodgier stories, but there were so many of them, and some of them were quite short. It didn't matter the overall feeling of the book at the end of it, which is something you don't quite get from the others because they're so disparate, the stories. Whereas this, it was kind of, this is a good mixture of stories about a world that feels like it's connected, even though the stories can be quite different.
Yeah.
There's so much space. There's so much design space.
Yeah.
Such a sandbox of a setting in many ways that you can get away with a lot. And while some are better than others, I really enjoyed the book.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And I agree. I think the Brian Craig stories they're all made better, I think, because they are all referenced and tie into the later novel that Brian
Yeah,
Craig wrote in the Dark Future. So like they're doing
true.
work to sort of establish certain elements as individual stories and characters. that will then come together later. The worst stories in this collection were probably there were a couple that I didn't really enjoy. Sadly, I think there was a I think 4 minute warning by Miles
Mm,
Burnham. I think I struggled with the sort of setting. It felt very much like a 2000 AD story. Perfectly
yeah,
fine for that world, but it didn't quite work for me in the Dark Future. When you take the Dark Future world being very Mad Maxy, like it is in the rest of the stories in this collection,
yeah,
obviously we will later discover that it's not all Mad Maxy because there's lots of different aspects to the Dark Future. So I
yes,
might enjoy 4 minute warning more on a reread now. It might make more sense to me in the sort of
yeah.
set.
I quite liked it. I think
Yeah. There were a couple of stories
because it
that
was
were
different.
that they were like straight up sort of gunfighters or sort of Knight Rider guys driving
Yeah.
their cars around that weren't great. There was a couple that sort of didn't quite come together. Uptown Girl by William King, where
Hmm.
again, we'd read a lot of great William King stories by this
His
point.
weakest out of everything in
I
the
think it
series,
probably is,
probably.
sadly. Yeah, yeah, and it's fine. It's not a
Yeah.
bad story, but it's sort of lacking a bit of a punch, I think.
Hmm.
Um, and then Route 666 by Jack Yeovil, which
Which was
starts
good.
off the demon download cycle,
It does, yes.
and it is a great start for the Dark Future because it teases a lot of the sort of chaotic elements of the Dark Future, as in the sort of the eldritch gods, I suppose you
Hmm.
might call it, for the Dark Future, which I think becomes super important and adds so much to this setting off the
Yeah.
back of that. But yeah, as a collection, I think I enjoyed reading it. I enjoyed the sort of the freshness of it and the difference to what we'd read so far. So, where do you think Route 666 is going to sit?
Hmm. I think there's enough there that aren't great enough that it can't be at the top. It's just whether it's sits between A and B for me, somewhere there.
Yeah.
It's whether the good ones are enough to push it up to an A, or whether the balance pushes it down to a high B sort of thing.
Mm.
And I'm not sure, if I'm honest with you.
I think I would
Potentially B.
go for the B. Yeah,
Mm,
yeah. I think I agree with that. I think there's 9 stories in that collection, and I think 3 maybe really good, and 3
yeah,
maybe are average, and 3 are maybe below
yeah,
average
yeah. I'm with
potentially.
you.
So
Yeah,
it sort of pulls it all
it's probably
down.
3A, 3B, and 3C.
Yeah, probably. But the next book was just another Dark Future book, but was just pure Jack Yeovil. So Kim Newman writing as Jack Yeovil. So
Yeah.
Demon Download. The saga, this continues straight on from Route 666, the short story, but this really kicks up a gear, I think, doesn't it?
Mm, it does. It does. It's great. It's great. And no surprise, again, to anyone who's watched all of our gabberings about these books that we love Kim Newman's
Hmm.
work, and this was just brilliant. And it's very hard. Well, we're jumping straight to scores already for me, but it's very hard to think of it anywhere than right at the top, because it's just,
Really? You'd go straight to S
yeah.
for it?
Well, unless we have a rule where you can only have one or two S's, I think he
No.
consistently lands them right at the top. And I think if you were saying, if you think of Dark Future as a setting, there's a couple of his books are just right up there, right at the
Mm.
top. So if it's either very high A or S, if you I would accept an A for it, but it's quite clearly one of those two.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think it does wonders for the Dark Future setting. There's some really, really good stuff in it. It is a really good start to the Demon Download cycle. There's a load of amazing moments in it. I'm kind of part of me kind of thinks it's an A, but
Hmm.
that's only because I kind of want somewhere to go
Yeah,
when
I'm
we
with
get
you.
to some
I'm
of the
with you.
later books, which I think just that they were even better for me.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
I could accept that. I'll definitely accept that.
so yeah, I think I'd argue for an A. Maybe that would change, on reflection when we sort of
Hmm.
take a look in totality. Let's go for A. Should we stick with
Yeah,
the A?
I agree. I agree. It was.
Okay. Another shift. It's the first
Mm,
40k stories. We've got Deathwing. So this is the anthology of 40k stories. Again, we get a fair few stories in here. So you get Deathwing by
hmm
Brian Ansell and William King. Um, we get which is about the actual Deathwing and Dark Angels Terminator chapter.
Yeah.
We get Warped Stars by Ian Watson. So Ian Watson's first foray into the 40k universe.
hmm
Lacrimata by Storm Constantine. Monastery of Death by Charles Stross.
hmm
Seed of Doubt by Neil McIntosh. Devil's Marauders by William King. And The Alien Beast Within. So,
Yeah.
which is another Ian Watson story. This one, I'm looking back. I'm looking back at the collection. In my mind, this was a bit of a mixed bag. This book,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
looking at actually like lowdown of the tales, I feel like Deathwing may be a bit of a sort of albatross, because it is the title of the collection. It's the first book. It's one of the longest, and it's also for me one of the worst stories in this
Yeah.
collection.
Yeah. There's a couple that are bad, if not more. I think
Yeah,
I remember struggling with quite a lot of this.
you think?
Um, yeah. Yeah. I think some of the at least one of the Ian Watson stories was
Sure. So yeah, Warped Stars was the
yeah.
Inquisitors end up coming to a planet because there is a young lad who has developed psychic powers and is being
Yeah, yeah,
communicated.
it was okay. There were
I
parts of
enjoyed
it
that
that were
one.
questionable, I think. I think maybe that's what was a fairer way of describing it. Some interesting choices.
Yeah, there were some. I
Um,
mean, I think that's going to be the Watson way, right? There are some interesting
yes.
choices. I quite enjoyed Warp Stars. It's not the greatest 40k story, but I thought, as you know, a sort of tale of the dangers of sort of psychic manifestation and Inquisitors
Mm,
turning up. Grim the Squat turns up for his first appearance. I thought that it was perfectly fine. What I think, again, and I throw this around a bit, but another favorite story of my favorite short, easily my favorite 40k short from this collection, but one of my favorite shorts out of all the GW books is Lacrimata by Storm Constantine. So
yes.
that was about a navigator and
hmm
the sort of corruption of
Yeah, I
chaos
really enjoyed
from a
that as
psyker.
well.
Really good. Really, really good. Just absolutely dripping with 40k feel. The sense of scale and the way in which
hmm
the warp works was all just amazing. I've now got a Storm Constantine collaboration with Michael Moorcock on my
hmm
shelf, waiting to be read. I'm very much looking forward to that. I think that's going to be great fun. This was brilliant, and I wish I would have loved to have seen more Storm Constantine 40k fiction, because it was just brilliant. I thought it was great. Um, Monastery of Death, I think you enjoyed more than I did. That was
hmm
the sort of religious planet that the Imperium had returned to, and there
Yes.
was kind of a,
Yeah.
is it an assassin? There was a bit of a political play between the leaders of the monastery versus the
The big
Imperial.
STC library or
Yeah, an
something.
STC
Yeah.
buried somewhere on the planet, all that sort
Yeah,
of
I think
stuff.
it was okay. I think it's not groundbreaking, but I think it was okay.
Yeah. Do you recall much about Seed of Doubt by Neil
I
McIntosh?
don't actually.
I'm not sure I do.
Maybe that's because it wasn't great and we didn't like it. I got a feeling we didn't.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at a page of the first page of the story, and
Yeah,
I don't remember anything.
I think it was looking through my notes. I think we might have slammed this one a little bit because it has an inquisitor, doesn't it? And they go to a yeah. I don't think we like that one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at this, and I'm really struggling to pull anything back from this one that I enjoyed. Yeah, I mean, that's not good. That's not a good sign. I don't think. Yeah, we can remember pretty reasonably well. It has been a year and a half of reading through these stories, but I think I remember most of the stories reasonably well. The fact that I barely remember this story at all, that seems pretty damning to me.
Yeah.
And I think Neil McIntosh was one of the authors of one of the weaker
Hmm.
Warhammer Fantasy stories as well, or some of the ones that didn't excite us. Devil's Marauders, though, I remember
Hmm.
very well. That was the William King story about an Imperial Guard unit on a
Yes.
jungle planet, but like in the canopy, because the jungle
Yeah.
itself is so thick that there's different like stratas
Yeah.
of like
Yeah.
the jungle and stuff. That was a cool idea.
That
But
was
then there's
cool.
also the sort of, there's the extremely bleak sort of Vietnam, but taken to the absolute extremes in terms of just the way in which the Imperium is bombarding the planet and constantly pulling back the front line. So
Yeah.
all the Imperial Guard are just constantly marching because if they stay where they are, the front line will have moved behind them and they're going to bombard it in 24 hours. So they're just on a constant march to try and get out of the way, and they're fighting against Chaos, who were like jumping out of the jungles and stuff.
Yeah.
It was great.
Very good. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I remember that. Very good.
really good 40K story that I think, and yeah, a lot to enjoy in the sort of bleakness of the 41st millennium. And then the Alien Beast Within, which was the first appearance of Melindy. This is Ian
Mm.
Watson's assassin character. Hey, Calidus
Yeah,
is
and it was quite interesting, wasn't it? As one of the polymorph and
yeah.
polymorphing, and yeah, I think it was really very interesting, and I think I remember quite enjoying it. I
Hmm.
could be misremembering, but I think it was good. I think it was good from memory, but they're definitely interesting concepts and unusual concepts that were gripping enough to keep you reading. That's for sure.
Yeah, because she's infiltrating like a gene stealer cult,
Yeah,
which is quite cool.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It was.
I don't know. I mean, maybe it is a mixed bag, really. I think the like Lacrimata for me, if I could take that, if we did do every single short story separately, man, that's
Yeah,
S tier every day for me.
yeah.
Um, as it is, with the collection having some highs and some lows, I'm thinking B at best.
Yeah, I was going to say, apart from a standout, something like Lacrimata, I think we've got a set of B and C stories. So, and very comfortable
Yeah.
in either of those, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with B. I think because like Devil's Marauders was good enough, and I like both Ian Watson stories enough for
Yes,
they
yeah,
sort of
yeah.
set a
I
good
think a
tone.
comfortable B.
Speaking of Ian Watson, then we've got
Hmm.
his first book in his trilogy, the only one
Yeah.
that was published by GW Books. So this is Inquisitor. Um, book one of the Inquisition War stories. We get an introduction to our Inquisitor Draco. We get Melindy the assassin, Grim the squat. There's a couple of other characters who turn up. I'm trying to remember the name. Thingy Cornelius. What's his name? Um,
Um, yes, the navigator person.
yeah, no, the sort of
Oh
villainous
no, that was Google.
Harlequin.
Google, wasn't it?
Yes, Google's the
Yes.
navigator.
Yeah.
The Harlequin, um, Carnelian. Yeah, so he's
Yeah.
quite an interesting character, a bit odd. Um, there are, we talked at the time that there are a few elements that maybe we wouldn't want to see in these kind of
Mm.
novels, but then there's also a load of really interesting ideas and sort of clever, cool moments, strange and unusual choices that work in interesting ways. A betrayal that results in an exterminatus of an entire planet out of
Hmm.
spite that plays really it's like super interesting.
Yeah,
And then
it's such a weird mix, wasn't it?
it was a
Of
really really weird mix.
some great ideas.
Yeah.
Chaos was good. The Imperium, there's good descriptions of the Imperium and the
Hmm.
universe. Um, and even some links to modern Horus Heresy lore as well. But then the characters were poorly written and quite shallow. Um, the pacing was all over the place,
Yep.
and and Ian Watson got overly horny with his writing, didn't he? To be honest with you, it's just too often, too often.
Yeah.
Not just one problematic scene, also the way he described Melindy at times as
Yeah.
well. It was almost embarrassing.
Sure, at
But
times, yeah, yeah.
and I think that uh, I don't think that should be forgiven, so that the good points
Yeah, I mean
may.
that's interesting. And totally fair. I think for me, so there were like cool things like they went into the Eye of Terror
Mm,
to a Slanesh planet,
yeah,
and that
yeah,
was quite
I mean that
cool.
was a bit weird as well, but
Yes, it was weird, but
it's
in
fun
an
but weird.
appropriate way. And then they smuggled themselves into the Imperial Palace through
Yeah,
like delivery boxes. That was really cool.
it was
And then,
fun but also too easy.
oh no, I quite liked it because yeah, it may have been easy to get onto the planet, but then they have to do like a pilgrimage through the Imperial Palace, and because the Imperial Palace is like a continent-sized building, they lose themselves, as in mentally, they
Yeah,
just lose who they are through this epic pilgrimage to try and get to the Emperor, which I thought was just so perfectly 40k. And there's loads of
yeah.
ideas in here that like the Emperor's Tarot, and stuff like that that I think are appearing for the first time.
Hmm.
Just stuff that will be like turning up across 40k lore for decades. It's
True,
all
true.
coming out of it. Not everything, but like there's some cool stuff that is coming out of the this book. Yeah.
I think it comes back to the pacing there. I mean, the concept of that massive pilgrimage
Mm.
is a book, and when you
Yeah.
handle it in 20 pages, it becomes weird and a problem,
I
I
mean,
think,
that's
for the
fair.
story.
Yeah, that's fair.
Um,
Where's
yeah,
what's your like what are you pitching then? Are you saying B, C,
C,
D, C?
C, yeah, because it's not terribly written. There are some really good concepts. There's enough redeeming things that bring it back up,
Mm.
but there's some unforgivable bits to it as well that just aren't needed. I'm not just talking about the the Ian Watson-y bits of it.
Sure.
I think that there are parts that spoil the good bits of the story, at least in terms of the pacing and the way it's done. So it's a shame. It's such a weird mix of a story. It's a
It is a
very,
weird
very
mix.
weird story.
Yeah. I'm struggling.
Very strange story. It's like
It
a don't do drugs kids story. It really is.
it is. I'm really
That's
struggling
probably
with
libelous. I'm not suggesting he was. Okay, that was a throwaway comment, but
it.
it's there's elements of it. I think, oh my god,
Yeah. Apart,
it's
I
like a
don't
fever
know.
dream of a story at
It
times, isn't
really
it?
is. It really is. And I don't know if I want to fight you on C because I can understand what you're saying. I guess I feel that there's some elements that felt so perfectly 40k to me, even
Mm,
though it's patchy, and I do agree with that, and it's got problematic elements and its pacing challenges. There's some stuff that's just so perfectly pitched
yeah.
that I kind of want to forgive some of
I can
that stuff a
understand that
bit
because
more.
it's with the different elements of the story all over the place in terms of individual tiers, the different
Yeah.
concepts are. But
As a
um,
story, like as a satisfying story, it's not. It's not a
mm.
satisfying. Like it's not a sort of coherent narrative that has a
And
beginning, a
is
middle, and
that what
end.
we're grading, really, isn't it? Is the
Yeah.
when it's an individual novel, you can only really grade it on whether it's a satisfying story overall.
So
And
I'd argue for B, I think.
I'm not going to lose any sleep over it being in a B,
Okay.
but yeah.
Okay. Well,
So you
I'm gonna force a B. I'm gonna force a B.
stick it where you want.
I'll force the B just because I think there's too much in it that is timeless to sort of ignore, even despite everything else. That's totally valid. Of what you've said. Um, on a different note, on a very
Mm,
different note, we've got the second David Ferring Conrad book. This is Shadow Breed. Um, one fancy story. We return to find out what Conrad is up to in his epic quest. Um, so he left at the end of the Conrad book and a sort of quite sudden. I'm going to chase down that brass knight,
mm,
and it was kind of set up like this brass knight would be some sort of important figure in Conrad's quest, in his fate, in his history. It was suggested that Wolf had some relationship with the Brass Knight, that there was going to be some major important showdowns with the Brass Knight. Brass Knight's found dead, just totally randomly, and is not important at all. The Brass Knight's armor is important because it turns out to be like chaos.
Mhm.
Um, Everyone is left behind, so all of the characters who were introduced in Conrad are absent. Conrad gets captured about 15 times. He teams up with a weird wizard guy beneath Middenheim and
Yeah.
fights chaos. Skaven, even a whole ton. This novel is so episodic and just
Yeah.
so absurd in just the events that take place. This is the EastEnders of
Yeah.
Warhammer fantasy fiction.
It's like taking someone's D&D character that they've kept alive for 20 years and writing up all of their adventures as a single novel, isn't it? In fact, both stories put together a bit like that.
Yeah,
Um, it's it's just weird, and
it's
yes,
just
there's
bad. I
good.
think it's bad.
Yeah, it is bad. Yeah,
I think it's bad. I think it doesn't even have the like charm of the Ian Watson weirdness, where it's clearly like, okay, this is a writer who's got a load of like unusual, quirky ideas that he's exploring through this story. This just felt like David Ferring forgot he had to turn in a manuscript like at 9 a.m. this morning. So he suddenly was like over his breakfast. Oh my gosh, I need to write 250
oh my
pages.
gosh, where's my folder with my D&D characters?
Yeah, where's the campaign? I don't want to sort of berate David Ferring and rake him over the coals, but I just do think that this was really sloppily written. It just doesn't make sense as a story, but even just in terms of like the structure of a book, it breaks every rule, I would imagine. Um,
Yeah,
and not in an interesting or satisfying way. Yeah,
no,
I
yeah,
think for me, and on top of all of those failures of execution, we also have a book here where Conrad, the first book in a trilogy, has set up a load of like, okay, here's a load of interesting ideas. We're going to explore and present them and sort of interrogate them over the course of a trilogy. One assumes everything, literally everything, is thrown out the window for this book. Nothing matters. No, there's nothing consequential from the previous stories apart from Conrad himself until the very final pages, where all of a sudden it's like, oh, you remember those characters from the first book? Well, now they're back for some reason. Get
yeah.
ready for a third part.
He remembered. So
Yeah.
S then, yeah.
Oh, oh.
Are you going to F or are
I would
you going to G?
100% go to F.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
think this was such a disappointment. And Conrad, we've got it in a B tier. At the time, I was way more optimistic coming out of Conrad, and sort of thinking, okay, this could be a really exciting second part. Um, and it just, no, it just was not. We're not easily the worst so far of the
Yeah,
books.
yeah, yeah.
I remember. I mean, it was a fun book club
It was
episode.
funny, yeah. We do have a
that,
lot of fun when they're really bad, don't we?
that was the best. That was the best thing about it. Yeah. But we're from a real low point to another high point, I think, with
Mm,
Crocodile Tears. So this is
yeah.
another Jack Yeovil Dark Future book. It continues the Demon Download cycle. We see a character who was introduced in the Route 666 short story and then had sort of been around, um, mentioned, I think, maybe in Demon Download. But we see
I think
what
so.
she's been up to properly since the events of the short story in this one. She sort of grows into a new character, Crocodile, who is kind of got a relationship with an ancient kind of being of some kind, and will help, presumably, to fight off these eldritch forces that are beginning to amass in the Dark Future universe. Um, this is, I think, how you do an epic trilogy of like,
Yeah.
It is fantasy. It's set in a science fiction universe, but there's fantasy elements, and this is an escalation that brings
Hmm.
with it a satisfying story in and of itself, but that also expands the world and gets you super excited for where the cycle goes next.
Yeah. Yeah. It was just great, wasn't it?
It
It was
was.
just all the way through. Lots of characters that we've seen before, some new ones introduced. It was just new Melodies Dark Future best, really,
Yeah.
wasn't it?
Yeah, really good. I think I don't think it's at his Dark Future best, if I can
Mhm.
reveal my feelings, but I think he's at a very high point of just this is great writing. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
even to the extent of, he loves his pop culture references, he loves his movie references. This book has canonized Freddy Krueger and Mike Myers and Jason Voorhees in the Dark Future setting, hanging out in a prison riot with a brand new character from the Dark Future universe who's also super interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, little moments like that, which are, they are, you can call them fan service, you can call them just throwaway nonsense, but they're treated with a sort of fun respect. They're
Yeah.
not just, at first it seems like they're just going to be name drops, but then they actually do some stuff in the sort of setting that works and makes sense and is just fun. And that follows through across the whole story. There's loads of cool stuff that's fun and benefits the story.
It's crazy that kind of stuff was done back then.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now you can't even put Games Workshop Middle Earth model parts on a 40K model and enter their own competition. Back then, they could write novels with stuff from other IP films. That is a crazy world
Yeah, Kim
that
Newman's
was back
making his
then.
own Fortnite. He's just putting everything in it. Yeah, incredible stuff. But
Brilliant,
yes,
though.
I mean, I think it should come as no surprise that I would happily put this in S tier.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's do it. Let's do it. Okay. I don't know. You may be pushing for S tier on this one. I don't know. But this is Storm Warriors, the final,
Uh,
the final book
yeah,
in the Orfeo trilogy. We go to another corner of the Warhammer world that we've not really explored, Albion. And basically, I think the analog for Wales in the Warhammer world.
yeah,
Um, and we get a story about uh, elves and um, men and magic and betrayal and all that sort of stuff. What were your thoughts on this one?
there's some really good ideas that just weren't delivered upon. Um, Probably some of the best ideas out of the three
Hmm.
that could have delivered a successful Orfeo story. But
Yeah,
again, we have another Orfeo story with Orfeo not in it, but someone that was so like Orfeo, it should have just been Orfeo.
yeah,
And if anything, that makes it worse. Um,
yeah.
and there were two stories in one as well
Right.
in many ways. There was two stories to be told here. One would have been a fun short story. It's almost like having the short story of the hunt mixed
Mm,
in with the bigger story that runs throughout the rest of it to do with these elves and their happenings with the knights in that sort of region of Albion.
yeah,
But it wasn't good. There's lots of plot holes, lots of ideas that were good that weren't followed through on. Um, yeah.
yeah. It's a shame this, I think, because I actually didn't mind the Albion story, the Storm Warriors story, and there's a few moments
Yeah,
in it that I
it
quite like.
was
There's like
okay. Yeah.
a magic battle through music and a magical harp,
Hmm.
which I really liked. I thought it played out in a really, really interesting way. Um, what lets this book down for me is the Orfeo
Hmm.
story. So this was the final chance for the Orfeo framing device to be given any kind of meaning beyond just like using pages. So there's
Hmm.
a real sense across the Orfeo books. I mean, Zarago's kind of makes sense. He's like, oh, this thing happened to me. I'm going to tell you this story. Then you get into the second book, Plague Demon, and you have this framing device that serves no purpose. Literally all it does is take up 5 pages or 20 pages at the start, 5 pages at the end to say, okay, I'm going to tell you a story. Okay, now I've told you a story. Like that's
Yeah.
all it does. and that's a total waste of page count. So I felt like coming into this, okay, there might be a way here. The framing device, it's been present. There must be some reason. We're going to get some kind of reveal on who Orfeo is, some relationship between Orfeo and his captor. Maybe the three stories he's chosen to tell have some sort of greater meaning to the dynamic between him and his captor, or they will reveal something new about the old world or the Warhammer world. But no, we just get this framing device of I'm telling you a story again, and
Yeah.
then at the end, I told you that story. Did you enjoy it?
But not only that, the beginning of this one again, it felt like we were being drawn back into the Orfeo story. Actually,
Yes.
gave it gave himself
Yeah,
a way back in to
he
make it about
did.
Orfeo again, and then went and went off and did something else. And
Yeah,
it just made it even worse. It made it more of an insult to
it
the
did.
reader. And
Yeah,
I
it
think
did.
what you had here was that you're quite right. It was the failure to make it an Orfeo story again, even with the setup, and then two ideas that would have made charming short stories in an
Hmm.
anthology, and that would be it. And probably B tier stories in an anthology as well.
Yeah,
And that those three elements don't make a good novel.
yeah. I think you're right. I mean, I don't know. I think I could be persuaded to go for a couple of different tiers here. But will you think C or D?
I was thinking D.
You think D?
Mm.
Yeah. I mean, I think it sounds like quite overly dramatic to say that it is an insult to the reader, but
Mm.
genuinely, like you say, the opening of the framing device in this third book of the Orfeo trilogy, it did suggest, okay, now we're going to actually reveal what the reason for this whole framing device was. And you get to the end, and he didn't. And
Yeah,
it
I
really
was
does just,
expecting it all the way through. I was
yeah,
at least expect. I was sort of thinking, I'm not super enjoying this story, but at least at the end, we're going to get a resolution to this, and it wasn't there, and it's
yeah,
very strange.
yeah. So I think D is fair. I think that's right. I'm happy to sign off on that one. Um, but you know what? After that, we've got Elvis back in the building
We have,
with the Jack Yeovil Dark Future story comeback tour, which is about Elvis Presley as a sanctioned operative in the Dark Future, going to, he's going to Cape Canaveral to stop some evil cultists from taking over a death satellite. Oh,
it's
and
good.
he fights against crocodile men.
It's good fun, isn't it?
It is good fun. Yeah. I mean, it sounds absurd, but it comes together so well.
It does somehow. Yeah, it does. Because I did have moments where I thought he might have just pushed it too far this time,
Yeah.
but he didn't. He got away with it, and it was unsurprising now, and it was in hindsight looking back, uh, and it was fine. But I did worry. I really did, especially with the Elvis stuff. There were points where I thought, is this going to spoil the immersion? And then every time I started to be concerned about it, it just moved at a pace that it worked fine. Yeah, really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Another cracking
It is.
new
Yeah, it is.
novel.
It really is. And I didn't, there was no immersion breaking for me. I can understand why it could. I think, like, I was so bought. I mean, as I said about like the horror icons in the previous book, I'm so bought into this kind of pop culture mashup version of Dark Future that Kim Newman was sort of pulling together,
Yeah,
which it works for me because yes, he's having a load of fun with that kind of stuff, but he's also delivering actually interesting adventures, like satisfying stories.
yeah,
We're seeing here across some of the other stories, they're not satisfying. They don't have a good beginning, a middle, and an end. They don't have good resolution. They don't tie things off in a satisfying way. Kim Newman always does, and he's having fun whilst he's doing it. And I think that this is kind of
yeah,
not the peak of that, but this is definitely, you know what? I'm totally off the leash. I'm just having great fun. I'm going to do something as absurd as make Elvis Presley a main character, and I'm going to sell it, and I'm going to make it
yeah,
work. And
yeah.
I just think that is a moment of like, wow, how?
Yeah.
But yeah, he does. He does. He just pulls together something that's really, really good fun. Makes me want to spend time in the Dark Future universe.
Yes, yeah. That's one of the saddest part about all of these is
Mm,
that well, we can return to Warhammer 40k and probably arguably better versions of Warhammer 40k than anything presented here. We can return to different versions of Warhammer Fantasy. Arguably a lot of it better, maybe not as good as the very best of it. With again Newman, but yeah, this is it really. We've got a
yeah.
little bit more to come that we've not read from Dark Future, but then the later stuff is not of a standard the same and not really the same at all. So
Sadly
it's
so.
good.
Yeah. Do you think then this is this S?
It's S or A, yeah, it's right up
Yeah.
there. So it is very hard to grade his good ones against each other, so to speak, but it's right up there.
Yeah. I'd go S. I'd push for the
Mhm.
S because I think that this one is my favorite of the Dark Future books. I think it stands next to Crocodile Tears really well, and
Hmm.
is even better for me, just because it was even more like propulsive. It just it pulled me along at such a pace, and I just turned the page and couldn't stop reading. I just wanted
Yeah.
to know more. It's great. Right, the final Dark Future story. Sadly, yeah, I kind of would have liked for that comeback tour to have been the last Dark Future story to end on a bit of high. The final Dark
Yeah.
Future story was actually Brian Craig, our old friend,
Yes.
with Ghost Dancers. Um, there was a lot of trepidation going into this because of the
Mm.
mixed sort of reception we'd had to his fantasy stories, but we actually quite enjoyed this one.
Yeah, it was good. I
Yeah,
think it just goes to show that that it's Warhammer Fantasy that's not a setting for him, rather than, and it just suited his style of writing so much more. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Like, as really enjoyed it. It's not quite as good as a Newman Dark Future, but right up there.
yeah,
I will reread it. And
yeah,
there's not many Brian Craig novels I kind of would say that with, but his Dark Future stuff is fine, and this is really good. Maybe the best of the Dark Future stuff he's done as well.
mm,
The shorts, he's got a couple of shorts that are okay, but this was just right up there, really good.
yeah. I think this is better than his Dark Future shorts, and I enjoyed his Dark Future shorts as well. I think that for me this book was a bit of a game of two halves because I think the
Hmm.
first half was great. I really, really enjoyed
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
A lot to love, and then the second half was fine, but didn't deliver to the highs of the first. So that's why, I personally wouldn't be able to say that it was a like a seamless top tier read,
yeah,
but I did enjoy it, and it added some value to the Dark Future universe. Like there was some stuff in here that was worth, even if you weren't a completionist and you were,
yeah,
even if you didn't feel compelled to read everything, I'd still recommend reading this as part of your Dark
yeah.
Future stuff because it was good.
Yeah,
It's
it's
worthwhile.
a good story. It wasn't,
Yeah, yeah,
like you said, it was a bit of a tale of two halves, but yeah, it was still good enough in itself, and as part of the overall world that has been formed by these novels,
yeah.
that pushes it towards the top of the tiers. If not, that it won't be at the top, but
Mm.
could it be an A, or is it a high B? Somewhere between them, I would say. It'd be one of
I think
those that kind of
so.
straddles the two.
Yeah, I probably would have skewed to B. I could be
Hmm.
convinced to go with A though because I
No,
genuinely
I'd say
think the first
I'm
half
comfortable with
was
B
really
as
good.
well.
Okay,
I think if the second half was as good as the first half, it would have been a solid A.
yeah, for sure.
And I
Yeah, yeah,
think that second half has dropped it down to a B.
yeah, yeah. But yes, a worthwhile read and definitely a good addition to the Dark Future lineup.
Hmm.
But we're left with our final book in the series. So this is another Jack Yeovil. So this is Kim Newman's final original GW book, Beasts in Velvet, another Warhammer
Yeah.
Fantasy story.
It's been
This
so
picked up.
long since we talked about it. I'm going to have
It's
to
been a
try and
while. It's been a
remember.
while. And this one, there's much like many other characters in here are returning from having done many different adventures. So because this takes place like 10 years after we'd last seen a couple of the characters, it brings together not just all of Kim Newman's characters, some of his heroes, some of his villains, but it touches on loads of other characters from across all of these other Warhammer Fantasy stories. Like loads of
Yeah.
people from the short stories appear in this book, and not only that, like we were just saying about the Dark Future books, there's loads of references in here. There's loads of fun stuff. There's also a really compelling mystery novel and horror novel in there as well.
There
Um,
is.
I'm a big fan.
Yeah, love it. It's
Yeah.
definitely my favorite. Definitely my favorite out
You
of
this
the
is
series.
you definitely say
My,
you're saying it's better than Drakenfels,
I
better
think
than
so.
Crocodile
Yeah,
Tears, Comeback Tour.
I think so. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, we've already graded quite a few things S tier, so we know it's going to be S tier, I
Yeah.
think. And if we had to grade within the S tier, then it does start getting hard. But I think it's probably if I could only read one of all of those stories, I think my love of Warhammer Fantasy over everything else
Mm.
would kind of skew it a little bit. It's difficult though. You are. Sometimes it just depends on what mood you're in because a Dark Future novel is very, very different to a fantasy novel. And maybe that's why these tiers work because they can both be S's and you don't need to play them off against each other. But
Yeah.
for me, it's very clearly an S tier book. Brilliant
Yeah.
stuff.
I can second that. I think, yeah, fantastic read. Brilliant end to the GW books series. Just as Drakenfels was one of the earliest, an opening salvo
Mhm.
in the GW books run. Yeah, really, really great. I would highly recommend it to anyone to read Drakenfels and then read this because brilliant.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I wonder whether we should save this tier and in the future, when we read books, add them to it to create this
Amazing.
this large kind of document of of gradings, or even
The
if it's just a
ultimate
few. Yeah, whether we
Warhammer
do it with
fiction.
everything
Yeah.
or just add the later
Yeah.
box tree novels and the expansions on it at the very
Oh,
least.
definitely going to be worth returning to. Yeah. Well, I mean, do you want to? Should we go through? Let's just double check our figures and make sure we're comfortable. So S tier is Drakenfels, Crocodile Tears, Comeback Tour, and Beast in Velvet.
Hmm.
A tier is Ignorant Armies and Demon Download.
Hmm.
B tier is Conrad, Red Thirst, Route 666, Deathwing, Inquisitor, and Ghost Dancers.
Hmm.
C tier is Zaragoz, Wolf Riders, Plague Demon.
Yeah.
D tier is Storm Warriors. And F tier is, I forget what it's called. We literally just talked about it. Because I can't, I always forget Storm Warriors and, oh, where is it? Shadow Breed. Shadow Breed.
Shadow Breed. Yeah.
Yeah, because the
Yeah.
covers are so similar. Like
They
when
are.
they're tiny little thumbnails, the covers are very similar. Shadow Breed, of course. Yes, the second Conrad book. So that's our only F tier book. So are
Mm.
you comfortable with that as a complete
Yeah. Yeah, I'm
rundown? Yeah.
happy. I'm happy with that. I think
Yeah, we've
it's
got a lot. B tier, perhaps unsurprisingly, is where most of the books have ended up.
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
But then we've got, six books out of the 17, six books getting into the S and the A tier is pretty good.
Yeah, just I think looking at that overall, that's a pretty good reflection of the way we felt having read these books. And as I say, I couldn't do it. I'd be really. I wish I could press a button and we'd had the conversation that put all of those individual stories into that tier. I don't want to have that conversation because I think my brain would melt. But it would be interesting just to have that produced for us.
Mhm.
And I'm not really a fan of using AI, but I'm sure we could plug all of our podcasts into it
Won't
and
do
it would
it.
do
I
it for us.
refuse. I
I don't blame
refuse.
you either. I don't blame you either. So, but I wouldn't mind the result from us having a conversation around it. But
Yeah.
I don't want to have that conversation, so I'm happy to have to leave that to people's imaginations. But yeah, it's been. I think it's a fair reflection
Yeah, I agree.
overall. And it's good to sort of jog a few memories about some of the things we've read going back quite a while now. So like you said,
Yeah. I mean,
year and
it's
a half.
been a fantastic experience just reading through them. I think having this and knowing we were going to come and talk about them. So that sort of increases almost the mindfulness and
Hmm.
you almost get to read the book again by talking about it. And again, we've revisited it with this, and that's sort of another giving it a third life. So I think it's been a really fun process to go
Yeah,
through them. And the fact that, yeah, the majority of the stories, by our reckoning, are B or above.
yeah,
That's great. That's really nice. And even, I think with the exception maybe of Shadowbreed, there was something positive. There were ideas, there were characters, there were moments, there was something interesting in every book,
yes,
more
yeah,
or less.
definitely. And some really, really excellent things that are kind of
Yes,
memorable
really.
level stuff, not just, oh, that was fun for the experiment, which is this project has been.
Hmm.
There are some books that where you're a genuine fan of
Yeah,
Newman based on this, and I think I am to a certain extent now as well. So it's and yeah, something I wouldn't have realised or experienced without doing this. So it's great, really good.
yeah,
And I'm looking forward to when we circle round to those few books that don't quite fit into this cycle, but their home is really here.
yeah.
Look, that will feel complete then.
Agreed. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And I'm glad that we've got it. I'm glad that the Box Tree series does have a few extra surprises
Mm,
for us. Yeah, we're going to be reading those at some point. We're going to be reading more Black Library stuff. So we're not continuing chronologically. That's why this was quite a nice point at which to do this,
yeah,
because we're not going straight into all the Box Tree titles. We're going to be reading different Black Library books and jumping around a bit, just sort of exploring different aspects of Warhammer and 40k fiction.
yeah,
Um, our first book that we're going to be doing in that series next month is going to be Malekith by Gav Thorpe. But we're also reading non-fiction, well, quote unquote non-fiction books like the army books and the codexes as well, and they're giving a completely different appreciation to me, at least, like a different side of fiction and writing
hmm
within the Warhammer world.
yes,
Lots of books that we've read before and we've used in game, as we've talked about in those episodes that we've already recorded. Very rarely have we sat down and gone cover to cover. Right, I'm going to read the Empire Armies book, like page
yeah,
1 to page 90. So doing that is kind of it's revealing lots of new exciting stuff as well. So it's
agreed.
another exciting sort of iteration of the GW Book Club experiment.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, I think this has been fun. It was great to go back and sort of reflect on what we've done to date, what we've read to date, and some of the conversations we've had. It's always a great pleasure to chat about these books, Stu. So I'm glad that you're on the journey with me.
Likewise, likewise.
If people want to find you ahead of the next GW Book Club, where can they do that online?
Miniature Realms on YouTube for all good hobby and painting and chatter about Warhammer mostly, and then social media that follows it as well. So search Miniature
Fantastic.
Realms, you'll find me.
Yep. Great stuff. And all of the links will be down below. All of my links will be down below as well. And I'm Jordan Sorcery everywhere online. We've both got Patreons. We've both got YouTube channels. Loads of fun stuff to go and check out. And you can also listen to the GW Book Club as a podcast if you want to, and find it in pretty much every podcast feed now. So plenty of opportunity to spend more time with us, chatting all sorts of fun stuff about the hobby. But until then, thank you everybody for joining me, and thank you, Stu, for a great conversation. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.